what's interesting for me, and this is something I've thought a lot about recently in my own personal life, especially with getting married and stuff like that, is that, did you see that there was that Philip Roth interview recently where someone asked him, like, how he wrote so many books, and I was sort of just like, well, I was never very interested in my own happiness. And I totally believe him, because he seems like the most miserable person I've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
And it also sort of made me sort of feel like, well, I'm pretty interested in my own happiness. And maybe that's going to fuck up my career somehow. And I think, it's funny. So both my parents are artists. My father's a writer, novelist, and my mother's a painter. And, I think they sacrificed a lot in their careers to have kids and to sort of be, for my dad to be an academic, to make to sort of have food on the table, those types of things, and,
Sure.
Pay for their children to go to college and all that stuff. And also just like, probably would have done a lot more work if they didn't have kids to raise. And I think for a long time I really kind of resented them for that in this strange way where I kind of felt like, they could have had better careers or something, and they took the easy way out. I don't know, or they they didn't want it enough, and they got soft somehow, and didn't dedicate their lives in this kind of like brutal and to like brutal misery it takes to be a true iconoclast or something. I think it's only recently in the past few years that I've sort of like completely turned a 180 on that feeling and kind of like understood their choices to be both like quite brave and also like more and more appealing, I think. I think especially, now sort of having published a couple books and having, had sort of some kinds of success in my work, I think there was a long time that I felt like I'm unhappy, everything's really hard, blah, 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 but it'll all be okay if I could just publish a book. And that's this thing I want so badly that every other sacrifice is worth it for this one thing. And I think that's where I needed to be at that moment in my life. But then I think what happens, and we've been talking about reception to your work and stuff, is that at some point, like, you sort of realize that being an artist can also be really unsatisfying, and that you're never going to, or at least I feel like I'm always going to be unsatisfied with every piece of work that I do. I'm never going to finish a book and think this is exactly the book that I wanted, that I set out to write, and this is, you know what I mean? I feel like I'll never be good enough, and I'll never, be able to take that kind of self-satisfaction. I get a lot of satisfaction out of it, but ultimately, most of the time it drives me to a lot of despair. And I think, not just in terms of like you publish a work and, then you're unsatisfied with the reception or how it came out, but I think just on the day-to-day level, it's like most days the writing is shitty. And there are some really good days, and those are the most satisfying things in the world, but there's a lot of time spent just feeling shitty about the thing you're doing. And I think at some point I sort of, and I think this was maybe a point also where I sort of got into a more serious romantic relationship, sort of felt like I wanted to have things in my life that made me happy that weren't my work, because my work was going to make me feel a lot of things, but it wasn't necessarily going to make me happy all the time, at the end of the day, every day. Like, when I was writing the first two books, and also I think part of it was that, like, I had to figure out if I could do this for a living, and if I could actually do anything worth doing. And so, I cut out a lot of things in my life that I enjoyed. I used to play music, and I sort of stopped playing music because I thought, I just have to be 100% focused on this one thing, and I'm not gonna, I don't know, whatever. I'm not gonna, like, spend as much time with friends, because then I'm not reading as much, and I need to read hundreds and hundreds of books in order to learn how to write a novel. And I'm not gonna, travel, because when I travel I don't work, and I can't take a vacation. I have to just keep going and pushing harder and harder and harder. And I think also I was very afraid of not being disciplined enough. And I think that came from the fact that I had never been disciplined about anything in my life. I was a very bad student in high school. I did a lot of drugs. I was a pretty bad student in college. And so when I sort of came to graduate school and moved to New York, I decided I was going to be a serious person and make this major life transformation. And I think I was so afraid of falling out of being that person that I had to be that person all the time. Mm-hmm. And that I couldn't take any break from it or I would never come back. I think maybe I finally reached this point where I feel confident that I'm going to keep doing the work. That I have enough discipline that, like, you know, I can go away for a week and come back and my novel will be there and I can work on it. Or I can, you know, instead of, like, spending both weekend days working, I can spend a few hours playing music with playing guitar with friends and, like, drinking beer and laughing, you know? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I don't know, that feels like a big change. And it also scares me. It also makes me worried that maybe, you know, if I'm not prioritizing my work as much, it won't be as good. Or, I don't know. It's scary. It's a scary thought, too. But it's also interesting. It's interesting that, I mean, I think it's been a really nice thing that I've had to watch my parents deal with all these issues, too, and continue to watch them. And, you know, continue to watch them in terms of their careers, in terms of their work, in terms of all these things. And talk to them about it. And I think that's also the nice thing, you know, it's in many ways about, you know, living in Brooklyn, being this writer community, is that I don't feel alone in any of these things. And I feel like I have many people who are dealing with the same things.
That's true.